Welcome to the Resume Storyteller, bringing you interviews with industry experts, regular folks who tested the job search waters and succeeded, and strategies to tell your story and land you job interviews. Here's your host, Virginia Franco.
Hello, everyone. I have with me today master storyteller Mark Carpenter. Mark is actually a serial storyteller. He has been telling stories since childhood and leveraged his ability into a career in marketing communications and public relations, and then later as a college professor and corporate facilitator. His storytelling became even more purposeful and effective after researching and writing the best-selling book, Master Storytelling: How to Turn Your Experiences into Stories That Teach, Lead, and Inspire. Now, as a facilitator, consultant, and speaker, he teaches others what he learned in the process. Mark, thank you so much for joining me. I've been really looking forward to our chat.
Oh, thank you, Virginia. I'm glad to be here.
So you heard me give a quick overview of what you do, but I'd love to hear a little bit more about how you came to write this book and to be doing what you're doing now.
Well, of course, there's a great story in that, because I've got a story for everything. Several years ago, I helped a friend basically ghostwrite a book. And so he talked to me about what he wanted in the book, and I helped him write it. And then I got to thinking, gosh, I need to write a book. And I remember I was on vacation with my wife. We were celebrating our anniversary. And I said to her, gosh, I feel like I should write my book now, but I don't know what the topic is. And my wife said, oh, I know what it is. And I said, wait, how can you know what my book topic is when I don't know what my book topic is? And she said, you have got to write a book about how you take everyday experiences and turn them into meaningful stories that teach great lessons. And my response to her was, that's not a book. Everybody knows how to do that. She says, no, people don't. Yeah. And the more I talked to people, the more they said, oh yeah, that would be great. That would be an awesome book. And so I started outlining that and thinking about it, and then had a conversation with my dear friend, Daryl Harmon, and he got excited about it too. And so we co-authored this book that we published in late 2018. And since then, we've expanded into having a workshop where we teach the skills of master storytelling, and it's kind of just gone from there.
Wow. And so why do you think it is that people love stories so much? What is it about them that just connects with us?
Yeah, and that's an interesting thing, because we intuitively kind of know that we like stories because we've lived them all our lives. But until I got into researching about the book, I didn't fully understand why it is that we love them so much. But part of the fact is that people love stories because we live stories. Our lives are stories. And stories, particularly stories that are designed to teach a principle, the best ones are from a slice of life. We can relate to those because we've lived those. Even if we haven't lived the exact same experiences, we've lived through the challenges and the emotions that other people face, and that connects us. But what we learned in our research for the book was it's a lot about how the human brain works too. There's some great research that was done by Yuri Hassan from Yale, and he talks about how he tracked a storyteller and a story listener through functional MRI. He tracked what their brains were doing during that time. And as the storyteller started the story, the listener would be just a little bit behind them in how their brain was reacting to that story. But as the story progressed, they started to sync up. The listener's brain was basically firing in the same way that the storyteller's brain was.
Really?
Stories connect us as people. And so that was one of the really cool things that we learned in researching the book.
So like the MRIs were in sync?
Yes. Yeah, they started syncing up. In fact, even a deeper level of the research, the further they went into a story, the listener actually started anticipating where the storyteller was going. And so their brain actually started firing just a little bit before where the storyteller was. Isn't that cool research?
That is fascinating. And I agree with you on a deeper level. We empathize with stories in a way we don't with just lectures that don't connect to anything that we've lived through.
And that's the emotional connection that we have. And in fact, there's some additional research by Paul Zak, without getting too geeky on research here. But Dr. Zach identified that our brains have some chemical reactions. There's chemical changes in our brains as we hear story. If you hear a well-told story that you can relate to the storyteller, you can relate to the experience they're having, our brains actually increase in the output of oxytocin. And oxytocin is a chemical that creates trust and relatability. And so that's what you're talking about, Virginia. That's how we can relate.
And that's oxytocin?
Yeah, it's oxytocin. And then if we hear in the story some degree of threat or some degree of risk that goes on in the story, it heightens our cortisol, which is another hormone that we produce. Cortisol has the effect of heightening our attention, and it keeps us focused. And so, anytime there's kind of a risk that comes into the story, even if it's a small risk, you start getting more cortisol, and that connects us more to the story.
And keep us focused.
Exactly. And this is why stories actually help people remember things better, is because of that increase in cortisol.
Really?
Yeah. And then when you get to a good, satisfying end of the story, you get an increase in the neurotransmitter dopamine. And that's the thing that we get when you like level up on a game or you check something off your to-do list. It's that satisfying kind of feeling we get. You get that same feeling at the end. And so there's that degree of satisfaction that comes with a well-told story as well.
So who needs, Ritalin and some of these other things if you could just listen to a good story and it has a good ending?
Well, and how many times have you done that? Think about the great stories you've heard, or maybe a great movie or your favorite book that you've read.
Yeah.
There's that great feeling of satisfaction that comes from that. And it's just that kind of feeling that comes at the end.
That's interesting. And you do feel like the author a little bit better. You feel like you have that trust, like you were saying, when you hear a well-connected story.
Yeah, you can kind of see the opposite side of this sometimes too. If you've ever been to a movie that you walked out of the movie and went, it didn't strike home for me.
Yeah. Yeah.
Typically the reason is that there's not relatable characters. You look at the characters, you look at what they do, and you go, really? And so there's no connection to you in that movie. But if you walk out being able to connect to the characters in that movie, it's going to have that impact on you, the positive impact.
I had no idea there was so much science behind this. That is really, really interesting.
And it's funny, Virginia, because as I started this process, I didn't realize that either, because this is something that's come very natural for me. And I intuitively get the stories are impactful, but I didn't realize the science actually backs that up as well.
That's right. That's right. And so why do you feel like storytelling is such an essential leadership skill today?
Yeah, I love that question, because I as I preach master storytelling out to people, they go, come on, that's kind of too soft. And leadership used to be a lot about command and control,
right.
Making sure that people were doing things and, keeping on top of them, very top down. That's changing a lot today. Leadership today is much more about influence. And influence comes through connecting with people. Whether that's the people who report to you as a leader, whether it's other leaders in the organization that your teams need to work together, the people you report to, customers, investors, whatever it is, storytelling is a skill for connecting people. And so if you want people to give their best, you need to connect with them as their leader. And stories are uniquely designed to make that connection because of the brain interactions we've just been talking about.
Now, you were intuitively a really strong storyteller, but for people that aren't, and I've always said, well, if you're not Irish and you're not Scottish, then you probably can't tell a good story. So, which I'm neither, so I always struggle with it. What are some of the bigger mistakes that people make when trying to tell a story, or what are they doing wrong?
Yeah, and so let me address because there's two questions kind of embedded in there, and one is, well, what if I'm not a natural storyteller? And because I hear that from people a lot too. Wow, this is just not my wheelhouse. I don't have the same background as you, where you told stories all the time as a kid. And for me, I was the fourth of 5 children, and so a lot of it was, this is my way to get attention. And,
How do I get mom and dad to pay attention to me in a way that won't get me in trouble?
Yeah, and I got intuitively that it was a way to make friends. But think about any skill that you've developed. Think about what you teach people in terms of resumes and interviews. Mm-hmm. These are skills that you've learned over time. How did you learn those skills? Well, likely it started with somebody who already had the skill who helped teach you. And then you practiced it. And with practicing it, you learned some things that you could do that were unique to you and that made you stronger. It's the same way with storytelling. Learn from people who already know, and then practice. And learn from your practice. Learn from the mistakes that you make. One of my favorite endorsements of storytelling is a skill came recently from an organization that teaches our master storytelling course to their sales team as part of relationship selling. And this person said, I understand now how to better sell using storytelling and why it helps people stay engaged. And I realized that you can sell without being salesy. Now, here's somebody who this wasn't their sales skill. This wasn't their go-to sales skill that helped them be successful. But they realized that as they developed this skill, it could help them be more successful and get the results that they really wanted.
And that relates to my audiences that are people that are going through interviews and writing career documents about them, because you're essentially selling yourself versus a product absolutely. Or a service. And so I know I work with a lot of people that struggle because they don't want to feel inauthentic, or they don't want to feel like they are embellishing or not being authentic. And so it sounds like storytelling is a way that you can connect with someone, get them to understand your strengths without feeling like you're bragging about yourself or doing a hard sell.
Yeah, you're right on with that. Storytelling actually makes you more authentic. Think about the interview process. We've all either been in interviews or we've conducted interviews or both. And we know there's kind of some cliche answers that people give. And as a hiring manager, I remember going through the interview process, listening to people answer questions. It's like, they're giving me the exact same answers, every single one of them. And so at the end, I'm like, I don't even know who to make a good decision about, who to hire for this, because everybody kind of gave the same answers. But think about, instead of answering the question that everybody hates to get, what's your greatest weakness?
Yeah.
Okay. Because we all know that we can't really reveal our greatest weakness in that answer. We have to say something that can come across as a strength.
Right, right.
What if instead you answered that question by identifying something that you've had as a weakness that you've been working to overcome? And so maybe it's, as my responsibilities have grown, it's been harder and harder for me to juggle all the different tasks that I have. But to address that, I've created this system that helps me really be organized. And I'm still working on that, but actually I'm pretty good at it now. And so when I face challenges like that, that's what I do, is I find ways to fix them. And so you're answering the question, but you're actually telling them, when I have weaknesses, I find ways to overcome them. And if you can do that in a form of a story, people will remember you better.
The story will resonate more than the explanation of that.
Yeah. And think about what we were just talking about as well in terms of the interview, about how stories connect you to the other person. If you're connecting to the interviewer, they're going to remember you better and they're more likely to hire you.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. And be memorable, standing out is what you need to do when you're competing with so many people.
Yeah, I had the opportunity recently to work with a group of undergraduate students at a university near my home who were looking to get into the graduate program for physical therapy. And it's a very competitive field. I didn't really know this, but it's a very competitive graduate program. And they were talking to me about, okay, how do we get through this process of getting accepted for graduate schools? Because there was an application they had to go through that included an essay, and then there was an interview process. And I just on tell your stories. Don't just give people your resume. Resumes are important. It's important to have the experience and some volunteer background. But they all had basically the same coursework. They all had basically the same volunteer experience. I said, tell the story in your application letter about how your experiences in volunteering have made you committed to the field of physical therapy. And when you have your interview, tell them the stories that really have had that impact on you, and that's going to help you be a better physical therapist going forward. It was an eye-opening experience for them. And one of them, I actually got to speak to this group because one of them was it's a neighbor of mine. He came back to me and he said, I got so many offers from so many different colleges. Storytelling can have in that process.
It's really amazing. And I focus on the written storytelling because in resumes, I feel like there's a way to tie results, put a beginning, a middle, and an end to a story that tells about an accomplishment or tells a result, because it does resonate more.
Yeah. And you talked there about beginning, middle, and end. And that relates back to the question you asked earlier. What are the mistakes that people make in storytelling? And sometimes they just aren't very deliberate about it. They know that stories are impactful, and so they just kind of tell an experience. But if you want to have a story make an impact, you have to know what your point is and then structure the story with that beginning, middle, and end, basically to elicit the brain chemicals that we were talking about earlier.
I like that. So that goes into the next question, which is, what are some mistakes some big mistakes that people tend to make when telling stories? Too little or too much. Yeah. Say it again. Too little or too much.
Yeah. And so they know that I've got this experience, and they tell every single detail in it. And then the point of the story gets lost. Or they're so nervous about telling the story that they rush to the end and people don't get the point. And so you have to have kind of the right balance. And it ties to understanding what your point is that you're trying to teach. What is the point you're trying to get across? If you understand that, that will help you edit appropriately your story so you can tell a 2 to 3 minute story that has great impact.
So when it comes to resume writing or formulating interview questions, we talk a lot about using a challenge, action, result, or situation, task, action, result format. Is it similar with storytelling?
Yeah, very similar. The way we structure it is intro, conflict, change. And so you need to set the stage for what was going on, what's the current state of life, what challenge came in. Of course, that's going to elicit some cortisol in people. And so what's the challenge that I faced in there? And then how did I overcome it? That's the change part that gets to the satisfactory ending.
To the dopamine. Tell me what the intro part is, and how do you make sure to not, I would imagine the intro and laying the groundwork is where you can give too much detail or not enough.
Yeah, right on. And I think that's the place where people most often add way too many details. And so the intro is what's the current state? This is where I'm, again, tying back to those brain chemicals. This is where I'm going to elicit some oxytocin, because I'm going to set the stage for how we are alike in this situation.
Okay, so something that people can empathize with and get that connection going.
Right on. And enough of the current state that they know that when the conflict comes, it's a change from that current state. It's putting my worthwhile goal at risk, is what that comes down to.
Okay. That makes sense. So back to I'm not Irish, I'm not Scottish. I have friends that they literally can, any experience they have there in the grocery store, they come up with a story that ties back to something meaningful. I never think of those things. Where do people find impactful stories when they are not doing exciting things?
That's such a great question, because most of us don't really do all those exciting things, right? I haven't walked on the moon or
right. Yeah, no, I know. I didn't dig a well in Uganda. No, same. And so, but I know there's people that can, like I said, they could take a checkout in the grocery store experience and turn it into a story. I've never understood how people can find those.
It's really interesting you bring that up because I have a neighbor that did that recently. And it was a checking out in the grocery store type of experience. And it worked. And the reason it worked is because the extraordinary is really found in the ordinary. Think about it. The stories we can relate to most are the stories we've lived ourselves. We can put ourselves in that story. We can put ourselves in that grocery store line. You know, if you tell me about arguing a case before the Supreme Court, maybe I can't relate to that. But if you tell me about an argument you had with a coworker or a family member, that I can relate to. It's actually more relatable to have those day-to-day things. I think that sometimes there's a bit of perspective bias in this, that we think our life's ordinary because we live it. I had a really interesting thought that hit me just a few months ago. Because I used to think, man, it would be so cool to write a book. People are so cool and smart when they write books. Then I published a book, and now I see people that write a book and I go, yeah, it's not that special anymore because I've done it. I've been there. As human beings, though, we're emotional people. We're emotional beings. And so that's what people can most relate to. So the tip I always give people is look for those moments in life where you have some kind of emotional reaction. And it may be even oh, that was odd kind of reaction. Or it may be that was funny, or that was frustrating, that was annoying, that was exhilarating. But anytime you have a little bit of an emotional reaction to something, take note of that experience. And take note of, what do I learn from this experience? And that can be a great story to tell.
I love that. Do you feel like it's sometimes there's a takeaway, but then it's applying it to the setting. So, if someone is in sales, you want to take that everyday story and apply it to your professional world. Do you have any guidance on how to do that?
Yeah. And again, it really is about what's the point that I want to make. And I've told the same story in different settings with different audiences, and I tweak the story just a little bit to make the point that I'm trying to make with that audience. So, for instance, I'll put this back into the realm of job interviews. You may have had a great project that you led, okay? And if you're interviewing and they're talking about, we're really results focused here. Well, tell the story with a focus around how you helped make sure that the team got this result, and focus on the result. But if they're like, if the interviewer is focused on team, and teamwork is really important here. Well, you can tell the same story. You can emphasize the points about how you brought the team together and helped overcome some challenges within the team to emphasize that point of teamwork. And so you can make different points with the same stories if you look for them.
Oh, so you're sort of pulling different highlights from the story based on the end goal, which is the point you want to make.
Yep. And it's that principle of beginning with the end in mind. If you begin in the construct of your story thinking about what is the point that I'm trying to make here, that's going to lead you to the right level of detail without giving too much detail. And it'll emphasize certain points over other points.
Yeah. When I write resumes, I'm sort of crafting the narrative with the end target in mind. So it sounds like the same principle. You're pulling the relevant pieces of it with an end goal in mind, which is the point you're trying to make.
Absolutely.
Oh, I love that. That makes it feel much less intimidating.
The other thing that I always encourage people to do is to consider, what point do you need to make? Again, this is beginning with the end in mind. And so if it's like, I don't have a good story, well, start thinking about, what experience do I have that could meet this end goal? And maybe it's not even your own experience that you're going to share. Maybe it's somebody else's. But if you start focusing on that, if you start looking for it, it'll come to you. You'll find it. The stories are so all around us that if we look for a point that we're trying to make, we will find the experience somewhere.
So if people, is it a natural storyteller and they're looking to hone this skill, can you give some guidance on how to hone it, how to sharpen it, how to keep on practicing. I'm thinking about people in interviews. They want, you don't want to be caught off guard. You want to have the story come off as natural. What advice do you have in terms of helping them to really, really cultivate the skill?
Yeah, so a couple of things along that process. Number one, listen to people who are good storytellers and dissect it. They'll look at, okay, why was that good? Why was that impactful? What was it about that story that actually worked? And then identify your own, outline them, and practice, and get some coaching. Sit in front of another person and tell them the story and see if they get the point. And if they don't, you might want to back it up and adjust it a little bit. I went through a time where I unexpectedly was without a job. And I sat down and wrote down all the questions that I expected to get in a job interview. And this was even before I got so deeply into, why stories work. But I identified what's the story I could tell to answer each of these questions. And then I practiced them. I practiced them out loud. And I went to job interviews and I told the story. And sometimes it didn't land. It didn't work. And so after the interview, I went, okay, how can I fix that? How can I make that land a little bit better? And I just adjusted it as I went. I got to the point, it was kind of a difficult economic time when I was trying to find that job. So I had a lot of interviews. I got to the point where I walked into the interview with this confidence of, you can't ask me a question that I don't have a really good answer for. and that was cool to be able to feel that level of confidence going into the interview, and was able to nail those interviews. But it takes some practice.
I agree. And confidence is everything. And I'm wondering if you have some thoughts on the fact that sometimes people have to tell stories now, virtually, or they have to write them out, where it used to be person to person, face to face. I know a lot of leaders are trying to influence people through social media, for instance. And then, job interviews a lot of times are happening on Zoom. Do you feel like you have to tweak the delivery or make any adjustments for the different communication forums?
That's a great question within a great insight for where we are in today's world. So I'm going to answer it in two ways, which is yes and no. The no part of it
depends. My favorite answer.
Yeah, that's always our favorite answer, and it's the most accurate answer in most cases too. That's why I don't want to be too definitive on that. But the yes part of it is that the structure is going to be the same. You're going to structure your story the same way, whether it's over Zoom, in person, or even in a cover letter, even in writing. The structure is basically going to be the same. You are going to need to adjust for length. When I'm talking to somebody face to face, I usually get a little more leeway on time than I do if they're reading it. So I might need to be a little more concise in the way that I tell the story when I'm writing it.
Yeah, I agree with that. And then for video, you feel like video and face-to-face sort of the same principles apply?
Close to the same. I think that the video is the in-between place, the in the middle place between in-person and written. You get a little more leeway than writing to tell your story, but you probably do need to be a little more concise as well in the video format. Because there's so many other distractions that we have in our world.
Right. It's so easy to lose focus, which is that. What was the, it wasn't serotonin. What was the dopamine? That's right.
Cortisol increases the focus.
Dopamine is Thanksgiving turkey. Sorry, wrong one.
Well, yeah, but it is the same thing.
So you have the longest time frame, probably face-to-face, in-person, old school, then video, then writing.
Yeah, that's what I would say. Yeah.
Okay. That's a good answer.
So you think about that in terms of the video. You want people to connect. You want to heighten their attention. So you want to get from that introduction part where you're setting the stage to, here's the problem I faced. Because that's what people want to know is, okay, well, how did you overcome that? Now I've got your attention.
Yes, you're right. It's all about attention spans. And for print writing, which is my area of expertise, the attention span is getting shorter and shorter.
Yeah.
Thanks to Twitter and TikTok and all of those things. So
Yeah, you're right on, and I'm an old writer as well. That's my background in terms of written communication, and yeah, you have to get really to the point of the story pretty quickly in the written format.
Yeah, I agree with that. All right, so you wear many hats at this point. You're speaking, you're writing, facilitating workshops. What is next for you? And we're in March of 2022 right now. Tell me what you have planned for the next year.
I want to help people. I want to just help thousands and thousands of people increase their influence by increasing their ability to tell stories. And so that my goal is really just to reach as far as I can to help people understand what we learned in the process of writing this book and what we intuitively knew before about how impactful stories can be to help you teach, lead, sell, and inspire, to accomplish whatever goals it is that you have out there. And regardless of your position, these are important skills to have. I'll tell you my favorite title. You mentioned a few of those titles, a few of those things that I do, but my favorite title right now is Grandpa. And Grandpa is the one title I've had that is not overrated.
Oh gosh, although you have to adjust your stories for a 2-year-old or little ones, which is probably very different.
Or a 4 or a 5 or a 6 or a 10-year-old, right?
There you go.
But what an important area of life to use storytelling to have positive influence. You know, as a parent and a grandparent, this is a skill that we can use to help impact the lives of young people.
Oh my gosh, you're right. Because young people still like to listen. You need to interest them.
Yep.
Oh, I love that. Well, Mark, thank you so much for joining me. In terms of if people want to learn more about you, I have on your bio your website, which is master-storytelling.com, your LinkedIn, and also a link to your YouTube channel. I've also embedded a link for people that want to purchase your hardcover book on Amazon, but you did mention that you were willing to share a free, not virtual copy. What's the word? I'm completely spacing on the word. Ebook. Thank you. My goodness. Yeah. Through your email, which is mark at master-storytelling.com. Is that right?
That is correct. So if you would send me an email, mark at master-storytelling.com. That hyphen's really important to get it to the right place.
Oh, yeah.
If you send me an email and say, hey, I heard you on Resume Storyteller talking to Virginia. I'd love to get a copy of your ebook. I'll send you an ebook. I'll send you a free ebook just to get you started on this. I do that, Virginia, because I think that your audience is such an important one to reach. People who are taking that next step in their careers. And I think we overlook storytelling as a great tool to help in that process. And so I'm happy to help people out by giving them a copy of our ebook. And check out the website while you're there. Poke around. We've got a couple other free resources there as well.
Well, thank you. And what is the takeaways that I have from this are that stories are everywhere, and they can be told in so many different formats: print, visual, in person, and they can serve so many purposes. They're not just for selling; they're for inspiring, they're for teaching, and they're for conveying your value.
Yep, and connecting people. You know, going back to the chemical reactions, it's about how do we make connections with others, and you can't influence others without having that connection.
I agree with that, and I love that that now we have some science to back this up.
Yeah, I could kind of go on all day about the different research studies that are involved in this, but I know we don't have time for that.
Well, I hope people will. I'm excited to look at your book and really dive into the science behind it, because I'm a huge geek that way. But thank you again. Great takeaways, and I'm excited to start incorporating some of these into my own storytelling.
Thank you so much, Virginia, for having me, and I wish you the best in your work. And take this forward and learn master storytelling. It's going to help in any area that we have.
I couldn't agree more. Thank you.
Thanks, Virginia.
You've been listening to The Resume Storyteller with Virginia Franco. To learn more about storytelling strategies to catch the eye of today's online skim hiring and decision makers, please visit www.virginiafrancoresumes.com.